Some people want dividend income, some want growth, and some want to invest outside the U.S. for diversification. So today, John takes $100,000 and invests in the best ETF for each of these jobs. One for income, one for growth, one for diversification. I'll show you how one of them would pay John around $14,000 a month, how another would grow the same $100,000 into nearly $9 million, and what the best international ETF does that the other two can't. And at the end, I'll show you how John combines all three into one portfolio projected to grow past $3 million while paying over $4,000 a month in dividend income. But before any of that happens, John has to do something most investors skip. He has to figure out what he actually wants from a fund. So he writes 3 questions on the whiteboard. Question 1, do I want the highest income possible? A paycheck from your portfolio, real money landing in your account every month, money you don't have to work for. Question 2, do I want the biggest account possible? The biggest balance, the number that makes you feel like you won. Question 3, do I want my money in places most U.S. investors never look? Not just America, but Europe, Japan, Australia, companies that most U.S. investors never own. Here's where it gets tricky. The biggest paycheck and the biggest balance come from different funds, not the same one, never the same one. And the international piece? That's a whole separate fund again. That's why John's looking at 3 ETFs. Each one answers a different question. One built to pay him, one built to grow, one built to take him outside the U.S. John's going to run $100,000 through each and see what it does. And John starts with income, the fund that's built to pay you while you own it. Coca-Cola, Chevron, Pepsi, Verizon, boring, profitable companies that have paid their shareholders cash for decades. John's income fund owns about 105 of them. It's called SCHD, the Schwab U.S. Dividend Equity ETF. Every company in there has to clear a tough screen. 10 straight years of dividend payments minimum. A track record of growing those dividends. Strong financials too, cash flow, low debt, real profits. Out of every U.S. dividend payer that survives the screen, only the top 100 make it in. SCHD's whole job is the dividend, the income. The share price growth is just an added bonus. Here's how dividends actually work, because the SCHD story falls apart without this part. When a company makes a profit, it has 2 choices. Keep the money to grow the business or send some of it back to shareholders as a dividend. SCHD owns 105 companies that choose the latter. Every quarter, their dividend payments flow into the fund. The fund pays them out to John. 2 things grow over time, the share price and the dividend per share. When both grow together, John's income grows with them every single year. That's the engine. Now let's see what it does to $100,000. SCHD's numbers come in like this: a starting dividend yield of 3.29%. A 10-year dividend growth rate of 10.43%, and an average annual share price appreciation of 9.25%. It's the 10.43% dividend growth that does the heavy lifting on the income side. Because while the share price is growing at 9.25% a year, the dividend per share is growing faster. That gap is what builds the income story. So John invests $100,000 through SCHD. Here's what happens. Year 1, the account would sit at $112,540. Year 10, it would reach $331,146. Year 20, $1,139,327. And by year 30, the projections land at $4,091,465. Of the $3.99 million in gains, $2.73 million would come from share price appreciation. The other $1.26 million would come from dividends getting reinvested year after year, buying more shares, which pay more dividends, which buy more shares. But the account size isn't the SCHD story. The income is the story. By year 30, SCHD would pay John $166,111 a year in dividend income. That's $13,843 a month, every month, without him doing a thing. And here's where it gets interesting. The companies inside SCHD pay dividends, and they raise them every single year. Watch the dividend climb on John's original $100,000. Year 1, $3,290. Year 5, $5,543. Year 10, $10,724. Year 20, $41,322. And year 30, $166,111. Same $100,000 invested. The dividend just keeps growing because the underlying companies keep raising their payouts. Nice, right? But SCHD only answers John's first question. 2 more to go. The next ETF would turn the same $100,000 into more than twice the SCHD balance. And by the end, I'll show you how John combines all three into a portfolio projected to grow past $3 million, paying over $4,000 a month every single month. But first, let's answer the second question. What if John wants the biggest portfolio value possible? The answer is QQQ, the Invesco QQQ Trust. It tracks the NASDAQ 100, the 100 biggest non-financial companies listed on the NASDAQ. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta, Google, Tesla, the giants of U.S. tech. QQQ holds more than just tech, though. Costco, PepsiCo, Honeywell, Mondelez are all in there too, but the engine that drives the returns is the tech names at the top of the basket. Now, before we run the numbers on QQQ, there's something I need to be honest about with you. QQQ's actual historical share price appreciation comes in at 20.96% per year. That's the real average over the past 10 years of history. It sounds great, but here's the problem. If I project 20.96% forward for 30 years, $100,000 would turn into nearly $31 million. And while that math is technically correct, it isn't exactly honest. QQQ's recent run has been historically unusual. Tech has dominated the last 15 years in a way it never has before. The NASDAQ doesn't return 20% a year forever. No index does. So for this video, I'm using a more conservative 16%, closer to QQQ's long-run average across multiple decades. Still aggressive, still tech-heavy growth, but a number you can actually defend 30 years out. Run those adjusted numbers through QQQ and you get this: a dividend yield of 0.4%, dividend growth of 9.12%, and that conservative 16% share price appreciation. Almost no income, but heavy on the growth. The shape is the exact opposite of SCHD. And here's what the projections look like. John's $100,000 after year 1 is projected to be around $116,400. Year 10, it would reach $452,544. Year 20, $2,021,513. Then the curve goes vertical. By year 30, $8,972,687. Nearly $9 million from $100,000 invested. Of the total $8.87 million in gains, $8.83 million would come from share price appreciation. Only $47,000 would come from dividend reinvestment. QQQ's compounding engine is pure share price growth. And then there's what QQQ pays in income. By year 30, QQQ would pay John $3,914 a year in dividends. That's $326 a month on an account worth nearly $9 million. So SCHD would pay $166,111 a year in dividends, while QQQ would pay $3,914, 42 times less income. QQQ wins the growth question by a landslide. It's the answer to John's second question about the biggest possible account. If maximizing the balance matters more than getting paid along the way, QQQ is definitely what you pick. But it doesn't pay you while it's growing, and every dollar of it sits inside U.S. borders. So we've got 2 questions down and 1 left. The third fund is an international ETF. Most U.S. investors treat international like a hedge, something you own because the textbook says you should, not because it earns. John's about to find out the textbook is wrong. The fund is IEFA, the iShares Core MSCI EAFE ETF. So what is EAFE? It's the acronym you'll see across international investing. It stands for Europe, Australasia, and the Far East, the standard benchmark for developed market stocks outside the U.S. The fund, IEFA, holds around 2,600 companies. We're talking Nestle, ASML, HSBC, Novartis, Mitsubishi, Shell, Sony, massive global businesses most U.S. investors never own. One fund, most of the developed world outside of America. Anyone who knows international ETFs is already asking, well, why IEFA and not VXUS, the Vanguard one that most people default to? On fees alone, VXUS actually wins. It charges 0.05% versus IEFA's 0.07%. A tiny edge, but real. However, John still picks IEFA anyway. Here's why. VXUS holds everything outside the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, plus emerging markets like China, India, Brazil. More countries, more diversification, more volatility. IEFA strips emerging markets out, just developed economies. Europe, Japan, Australia, Canada, less swing in either direction. John's already running QQQ for high volatility growth. The international slot has to be a steady anchor, the part of the portfolio that doesn't swing. Across 2,600 international companies, IEFA delivers a 3.33% dividend yield, 8.31% dividend growth, and 6.18% share price appreciation. One thing to note before the projections, that 3.33% starting yield, it's actually higher than SCHD's 3.29%. Most U.S.-focused investors would never guess that an international ETF out-yields the famous U.S. dividend fund, but history validates it. So John runs $100,000 through IEFA, and here's what happens. Year 1, the account would sit at $109,510. By year 10, it would reach $255,807. Year 20, $707,478. And by year 30, the account would land at $2,152,720. Of the $2.05 million in gains, $1.11 million would come from share price appreciation. $945,000 would come from dividend reinvestment. Almost a 50-50 split between price growth and reinvested dividends, a completely different shape from QQQ, where dividends would contribute almost nothing. Closer to SCHD's shape, which is exactly why the income side does the work that it does. Okay, so now John has the best fund in each category: SCHD for income, QQQ for growth, IEFA for international. But what happens if he combines all 3 into a single portfolio? When you blend the 3 together at equal weight, the combined portfolio settles at a 2.34% dividend yield, dividend growth of 9.29%, and average annual appreciation of 10.48%. 3 middle ground numbers that don't win any single race, but show up in all 3. Run those blended numbers across 30 years, and here's what the portfolio does. Year 1, the balance would sit at $112,817. Year 10, it would reach $330,412. Year 20, $1,067,711. By year 30, projections land it at $3,382,726, a $3.28 million gain on the original $100,000. Of that gain, $2.8 million would come from share price appreciation. The other $483,000 would come from reinvested dividends. The combined portfolio doesn't win the growth race. QQQ alone would hit $8.97 million by year 30, nearly 3 times the combined balance. On income, it gives up even more. SCHD alone would pay $13,843 a month, more than 3 times what the combined portfolio puts out. But the combined portfolio is the most consistent version of the 3. When QQQ has a rough year, and tech will have rough years, SCHD's dividends keep landing. When U.S. stocks pull back, IEFA's exposure to Europe and Japan softens the hit. When international lags, QQQ and SCHD pull the portfolio forward. That's the cost of holding all 3. You give up the ceiling of any single answer and get a portfolio that holds up when any one of them stumbles. The combined portfolio answers every one of John's questions at the same time. It just doesn't dominate any of them.